The porch light stung my eyes, and my breath came out in white clouds against the dark. My daughter was soaking wet in my arms, 13 months old, shivering so hard her teeth clicked together. I could barely feel my own hands. I knocked, and my voice cracked into the cold. "Dad, please open the door." The lock turned. My father stood there in his robe, reading glasses still pushed up on his forehead. He looked at me, then down at his granddaughter's wet hair and pale lips. "My husband," I whispered, "brought his mistress home. His mother packed our things, kicked us into the snow, and changed the locks." For a long moment he said nothing. He just stared at Rosie, trembling in the yellow porch light. Then he slowly closed his hand around the keys until his knuckles went white. They messed with the wrong family. But there was one thing none of them knew that night. One quiet thing my father had done years before, and it was about to take everything back. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the quietest woman at the table is the one you should never underestimate, and where every locked door has a key someone forgot about. I'm Nora. That Christmas I was 31, a pediatric nurse, and I thought I had already lost everything. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up, because the porch was the end of a long, quiet unraveling, not the start of it. My name is Honora, but nobody has called me that since the 2nd grade. To everyone, I'm Nora. I spend my days on the pediatric floor at Mercy General, holding small hands through IV starts and telling nervous parents their babies are going to be fine. I'm good at staying calm. It's the thing people always say about me, usually right before they hand me one more problem to carry. Calm Nora. Steady Nora. The one who never makes a scene. I married Derek 4 years ago, when I was 27 and he was 30. He was charming in the way that fills a room and empties a bank account. Back then, I mistook noise for warmth. When Rosie was born, 13 months before that Christmas, I finally understood what my mother meant when she said love could reorganize your whole spine. I would have walked into traffic for that baby. Instead, I did something that felt just as dangerous. I kept trying to hold a family together long after it had started to rot from the inside. I worked doubles so the mortgage stayed paid. I smoothed every argument. I told myself that if I just carried a little more, the weight would even out. That's the flaw nobody warns you about in nursing school. You get so used to being the strong one that you don't notice when the people around you have quietly decided your strength means you'll never need anything back. I didn't see it yet, but I was about to. The house came before Derek did, and that detail matters more than I understood at the time. My mother died when I was 24, after a short and brutal fight with cancer that taught me exactly how fast a home can go silent. She left me what little she had, and it wasn't much by anyone's measure, but it was enough, with my father's help, to buy a small blue house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac when I was 25, 2 years before I ever met Derek. My father handled the paperwork, because that is what he does. He has been a family law attorney for 35 years, and he approaches a real estate closing the way other men approach a chessboard. Slowly, 3 moves ahead. I remember sitting at his kitchen table while he slid document after document across to me, explaining each one in his low, patient voice. Most of it went right over my head. I was 25 and grieving and just wanted a door I could lock behind me. At the end, he tapped one folder twice with his finger. "Keep this in your name, sweetheart," he said. "No matter who comes along, promise me." I promised. The way you promise things you don't fully understand. I signed where he pointed. Then I went home to my little blue house and cried for my mother and thought nothing more of it. I didn't know I was signing the one thing that would save my daughter's life 6 years later. My father knew. He always knew. He just never made me carry a fear I didn't need to carry yet. Priscilla moved in the spring before that Christmas, and she came the way weather comes. First a phone call, then a suitcase, then a life. Derek's father had passed 2 years earlier, and Priscilla's finances had come apart in the quiet, humiliating way that happens to a lot of widows nobody helped in time. The investments were gone. The condo was underwater. "Just a few weeks, Nora," Derek told me, already carrying her boxes up my front steps. "Until she's back on her feet." I said yes, Of course. I always said yes. She was 61. She was frightened underneath all that starch, and I am not the kind of woman who leaves someone in the cold. That's a sentence I would think about a lot later. She took over the kitchen within a week. My spices got rearranged. My coffee mugs got moved to a cabinet I couldn't reach. She had a way of standing in a doorway with her arms folded, watching me feed my own daughter, that made me feel like a guest auditioning for a role I already had. "That's not how we hold a bottle in this family," she'd say. This family. As if I had married into a monarchy and forgotten my place. Derek watched it happen and did nothing, because a man who has never been told no by his mother rarely learns to say it himself. I told myself she was grieving. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things that spring, standing in the kitchen I had bought with my dead mother's money, wondering when I had become a stranger in my own home. A few weeks turned into a season. Nobody mentioned her leaving again. The erosion was small at first, the way a riverbank goes. You don't see the land leaving. You just notice one day that the water is closer than it used to be. Priscilla started locking the pantry, then handing me a list of what I was allowed to use. She moved Rosie's crib into a smaller room, so the baby wouldn't disturb the grown-ups, and Derek nodded along like it was reasonable. When Rosie ran a fever, Priscilla told me I was coddling her. I was a pediatric nurse being lectured on childcare by a woman who thought teething gel was a conspiracy. I laughed about it once, to a coworker, and then I stopped laughing, because I realized I was telling the story to convince myself it was funny. It wasn't. I picked up more shifts. Partly for the money, because Derek's business ideas had a way of costing us instead of paying us, but mostly, if I'm honest, because the hospital felt more like home than my home did. On the pediatric floor, I mattered. I was competent. Small hands reached for mine and trusted them. Then I'd drive back to the cul-de-sac and become the woman who did everything and was thanked for nothing. Derek called it keeping the peace. I called it survival. Rosie called it the only life she'd ever known, and that was the thought that kept me quiet. I kept telling myself that a calm house was better than a broken one, even if the calm was just me holding my breath. I was so busy carrying everyone that I never once asked what would happen if I set them down. I would find out on Christmas Eve. The first time I felt real danger, it wore a smile and carried a pen. It was October. Derek made my favorite dinner, which should have been my first warning, and Priscilla poured the wine, which was my second. Halfway through, Derek slid a folder across the table. "I talked to a guy at the bank," he said. "We should put my name on the deed and refinance. Free up some cash for the business. It's what married people do, Nora." Priscilla nodded like a metronome. "A wife who trusts her husband doesn't hide the house from him," she said. There it was. The trap dressed as togetherness. And here is the part I need you to understand, because I have replayed it 1,000 times. I did not just smile and sign. Something in me went cold and careful. I asked questions. I asked why we needed to refinance a house that was nearly paid off. I asked what the business actually was. The answers were fog. So I told them I wanted to think about it. And that night I called my father. Not because I already knew what was coming, because he was the only lawyer I trusted, and because his voice had steadied me my whole life. He listened to all of it. Then he said, very quietly, "Don't sign anything, sweetheart. Not one page. If they push, you tell them your lawyer said no." I didn't ask what he meant. I just did it. When Derek pressed again, I said no. When Priscilla called me ungrateful, I said no. The bank, it turned out, couldn't add anyone without my signature anyway. So I never gave it. I protected the house without ever knowing exactly why I was protecting it. What I couldn't protect, it turned out, was the marriage. But by then I wasn't sure it was worth saving. Brooke arrived in pieces, the way a lie usually does. First a name Derek dropped too often. Then a laugh in the background of a phone call he took in the garage. Then a scent on his coat that wasn't mine, floral and expensive. The kind of perfume that announces a woman who has never had to choose between groceries and gas. "Just a coworker," Derek said when I asked, and he changed his phone password that same week. I noticed. I noticed everything. That's the cruel joke about being the calm one. People assume calm means blind. It doesn't. It means you're doing the math in silence while your face stays still. I did the math. Late nights. New clothes he couldn't afford. The way Priscilla suddenly defended him before I'd even accused him of anything, which is how you know a mother already knows. I had a choice in front of me, and I want to be honest about which one I made. I could have blown it all up right then. Instead, I looked at Rosie asleep in her crib, 13 months old, and I chose to wait. To gather myself. To keep my hands steady on the one thing that mattered. I told myself I needed proof before I detonated my daughter's whole world. Maybe that was courage. Maybe it was just one more thing I was carrying so no one else had to. Either way, I decided I would get through the holidays. One quiet Christmas, I thought. Give Rosie one good memory before everything changed. I even switched shifts so I could be home early on Christmas Eve to surprise them. I got my surprise, all right. It just wasn't the one I'd planned. Christmas Eve came down in soft, fat flakes that turned the whole cul-de-sac into a snow globe. I finished my shift at 4, stopped for the little wooden train Rosie had pointed at in a shop window, and drove home with the heater blowing and carols on the radio. For 1 hour I let myself pretend. I pictured the tree lit up, Rosie in her red pajamas. Maybe, if I was lucky, one evening where nobody made me feel like a trespasser in my own life. I even practiced being generous in my head. I would be kind to Priscilla. I would give Derek one more chance to be a father. I turned onto our street, and my headlights swept across the driveway, and my foot came off the gas on its own. There was a car in my driveway that wasn't ours. Sleek, red, dusted with fresh snow, parked crooked like it owned the place. Every light in my house was on. I could see shapes moving behind the curtains, comfortable shapes, laughing shapes. I sat there in the dark with the engine ticking and the wooden train in a bag on the passenger seat, and something in my chest went very quiet and very still. Rosie made a small sound from her car seat. I looked back at her sleepy face and her one mittened fist, and I felt the last of my pretending drain away. I didn't know yet exactly what was waiting behind that door, but I knew it was mine to walk into, and I knew I would walk into it holding my daughter, because that is what mothers do. I turned off the engine. I unbuckled her. And I went up my own front steps like a woman knocking on a stranger's life. If you've ever driven up to a house full of people who forgot it was yours, you already know the exact cold I'm talking about. Stay with me, because what my father kept in a small gray box changed everything that happened next. Comment the word home if you're still standing after someone tried to lock you out of your own life. And subscribe. The door was unlocked, which somehow made it worse. I stepped into the warmth of my own house carrying my daughter, and I walked straight into a scene that had clearly been going on for a while. There was a woman in my kitchen, younger than me, in leggings and one of my cream sweaters, the soft one I'd bought myself the year Rosie was born. She was pulling my wine glasses down from the high cabinet like she knew exactly where they lived. Brooke. She turned when she heard me, and she didn't even have the decency to look afraid. She looked annoyed. Derek was at the counter, sleeves rolled up, pouring 2 glasses like a man hosting a party in a house he thought he owned. He saw me, and for a half second the old Derek flickered, the one who used to at least pretend. Then it was gone. "Nora," he said, flat. "You're early." Not sorry. Early. Like I was the interruption. I held Rosie a little tighter and I kept my voice level, because there was a baby in the room, and I refused to be the reason my daughter's first memory is screaming. "Who is this?" I said. It wasn't really a question. Brooke set the glasses down and folded her arms in a way I recognized instantly, because I'd been watching Priscilla do it for months, and right on cue, I heard the stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Priscilla came down in her good cardigan, the one she saved for church and funerals, and she looked at me standing in my own doorway with my coat still on and snow melting in my hair. She smiled. Not a warm smile, the smile of someone who has already won a game you didn't know you were playing. "We've been expecting you," she said. "We've made some arrangements." Arrangements. That was the word she used, like she was talking about a seating chart and not my life. Derek finally set down the wine and had the nerve to look tired, as if I were the one exhausting him. "Nora, don't make this hard," he said. "Brooke and I are together now. It's serious. It's been serious." He gestured vaguely around the room, at the tree I had decorated, at the stockings I had hung. "This house needs to be for the real family now. For us. It's better if you go tonight. Clean. Before Rosie's old enough to remember the fighting." The real family. He said it standing in front of his daughter. I looked at him, and I felt something I had never felt for him before, which was nothing. No anger yet. Not even grief. Just a strange, echoing emptiness where 4 years used to be. "This is my house," I said quietly. Priscilla laughed. One sharp note. "It's Derek's house too, dear. It's a marriage. And frankly, after everything this family has done for you, the least you can do is not cause a scene on Christmas." She said family again. She kept using that word like a key, and every time she turned it, it locked me a little further out. I asked to see Rosie's things. I asked, calm as a Sunday, where my daughter was supposed to sleep. And that's when Priscilla stepped aside and I saw them. By the front door, lined up like garbage set out for collection. 3 black trash bags. My clothes, my books. Rosie's stuffed rabbit, one gray ear poking out through the plastic. They hadn't just decided to throw me out. They had already done it, hours ago, while I was at work saving other people's children. I have thought 100 times about what a braver woman might have done, screamed, called the police right there, refused to move an inch. But I had a 13-month-old on my hip and 3 trash bags of our life by the door, and my whole body was locked around one instinct, which was to get my baby somewhere safe before this got worse. So I bent down to gather the bags, and that was when Priscilla opened the front door and let the cold pour in. "Take your things," she said. "There's a locksmith coming at 6. It'll be cleaner for everyone." A locksmith. She'd planned it down to the appointment. Derek didn't stop her. Brooke didn't even look up from her phone. I carried the bags out first. 2 trips, snow soaking through my scrubs, and then I came back for Rosie and my purse. On the last trip, Priscilla put her hand flat on the doorframe, blocking me from stepping back inside for the diaper bag. Her eyes were cold and certain and, underneath, just a little bit afraid, though I wouldn't understand that until much later. "This was never your home," she said, and she shut the door in my face. I heard the deadbolt turn. Then I heard a second, unfamiliar sound, a drill, high and thin, and I realized the locksmith was already there, already at work, changing the locks on the house I had bought with my dead mother's money. I stood on the porch with my daughter and 3 trash bags and the snow coming down, and for one terrible second the whole world tilted. Then Rosie slipped. My arms were full and my feet were numb, and she twisted and went down into the slush at the edge of the walk, soaking through her snowsuit in an instant, and she started to wail. That sound put my spine back. I scooped her up out of the freezing slush, and I did the only thing my hands still knew how to do. I stripped off my own coat and wrapped her in it, right there in the yard, and I pressed her wet, shaking little body against my chest to give her my heat. Then I turned back to the house, one last time, because some stubborn part of me still couldn't believe it. I climbed the porch steps and I pounded on my own door. "Please," I called. "Please open the door. She's soaked. She's freezing. Just let me get her warm. Please open the door." Nothing. The porch light stayed on, cheerful and yellow, mocking me. Behind the curtains I saw a shape cross the room and pull the drapes tighter. That was the moment the last piece of the old Nora died on that porch. The one who kept carrying. The one who said yes. She looked at her daughter's blue lips and she understood that begging had never once worked on these people, and it wasn't going to start now. So I stopped. I didn't cry and I didn't scream. I walked back to my car through the snow, and I buckled Rosie into her seat and cranked the heat as high as it would go and held my hand against the vent until it blew warm. Then I did the one thing that had never failed me in 31 years of life. I drove to my father. His house was 20 minutes away, across town, past all the dark and glittering windows of other people's Christmases. Rosie's crying softened to hiccups, then to sleep. And the whole way there, my hands steady on the wheel, one thought turned over and over in my chest. Dad will know what to do. Dad always knows. Which brings me back to the porch where this all began. My father's porch, warm lit and safe, 20 minutes and a whole lifetime away from the one that had just shut me out. I knocked, and my voice cracked, and I said, "Dad, please open the door." And he did. He opened it the way I had prayed my own door would open and never did. He took one look at me, coatless and shaking, at Rosie soaked and pale in my arms, and 35 years of courtroom composure did not stop his face from breaking, just for a second, into something raw. He pulled us both inside out of the cold. "My husband," I whispered into his shoulder, "brought his mistress home. His mother packed our things, kicked us into the snow, and changed the locks." He didn't gasp. He didn't ask a single question. He just held us, and I felt him go very still, the way the air goes still before a storm turns. He looked down at his granddaughter, at her wet hair and her chattering teeth, and something moved behind his eyes that I had never seen there in all my life. Not panic, not even anger exactly. Something colder and far more patient. He reached over to the little dish by the door and closed his hand around his keys, slow, until his knuckles went white. "They messed with the wrong family," he said, quiet, almost gentle, and that gentleness scared me more than shouting would have. Then he snapped back into motion. All business, the father I knew. Warm bath running, dry clothes from the spare room where Rosie's overnight things always lived. Cocoa on the stove. He got my daughter warm and pink and giggling within the hour, and only when she was asleep in the guest crib did he finally sit me down at his kitchen table. "Now," he said, "let me show you something." He left the room and came back carrying a small gray fireproof box, the kind you'd overlook in any closet in America. He set it on the table between us, dialed the little combination, and opened the lid. Inside were the ordinary sacred things of a careful man's life. My mother's wedding ring, my childhood social security card, and a thick folder, soft at the corners from handling, that he lifted out and laid in front of me like he was placing something on an altar. "You signed these 6 years ago," he said. "You were 25 and grieving, and you trusted me, and I have never been more grateful that you did." He opened the folder. The top page was the deed to my little blue house. I had seen 100 documents in my life and understood almost none of them. But I understood the name printed in the ownership line because it was mine, and it was the only one there. Not Derek's, not, and husband, just me, and beneath it, words I'd signed without reading. The Honora Frost Living Trust. "This house," my father said, tapping it twice with one finger, the same way he had 6 years before, "is yours. It was bought with your mother's money before you ever met that man, and it has sat inside your own trust ever since. Your name is the only name on it. It always has been." I stared at that page until the letters blurred. Then he reached back into the box and set one more thing on top of the folder. A letter, in my mother's slanted hand, my own name on the front. "She wrote it the month before she died," he said softly. "She made me promise to keep it here, with the deed, until the day you needed both." I put my fingers on the envelope and I did not open it yet. I couldn't. But I held onto it, and something in me that had been falling for 4 years finally hit solid ground. I need to be clear about what my father did and did not do, because it matters. He did not hand me a magic weapon that solved everything. He handed me the truth and then made me decide what to do with it. "Listen carefully," he said, pouring us both coffee at 1 in the morning like it was the most natural thing in the world. You bought that house before the marriage, with inherited money, and I placed it in a trust in your name alone. In the eyes of the law, that makes it your separate property. It is not a marital asset. Derek has no claim to it. None. I asked about the prenup we'd signed, the one Derek had rolled his eyes at. That protects your separate property and limits what he can take in a divorce, he said. I wrote it plain and I wrote it fair. No judge will throw it out. Then he set his cup down and looked at me hard. And Nora, when his mother changed those locks tonight, she didn't take your house. She committed an illegal lockout. You are the sole legal owner. A person cannot be locked out of a home she owns. That woman in there, he said, meaning Brooke, is a trespasser. I felt the floor shift under me, but it shifted toward me for once. And then my father said the thing I have carried ever since. The law can protect you, he said. But the law doesn't act on its own. It waits for you to pick it up. I built you a shield 6 years ago, sweetheart. Whether you raise it is entirely up to you. He wasn't going to charge in for me. He was going to stand beside me while I charged in for myself. I looked at the deed with my name on it, and the letter from my mother, and my daughter sleeping safe down the hall. Then let's raise it, I said. We didn't celebrate. We didn't gloat. We got to work the way careful people do, in the small hours, with the lamp low so it wouldn't wake the baby. The first thing my father did was pick up the phone and call a colleague, a pediatrician friend who owed him a favor and didn't mind a late night. Within the hour, she was at the door with her bag, and she checked Rosie over gently while my daughter slept. Cold, she said, but fine. A little chill, no lasting harm. Then she wrote it all down. The time, the temperature of the child when she arrived, the wet clothes, the exposure, and she signed and dated it. Not for revenge, for the record. Because my father taught me that night that the calmest person in any room is usually the one holding the paperwork. We photographed everything, the trash bags still in the trunk of my car, my whole life in plastic, Rosie's ruined snowsuit, the timestamp on my phone from when I'd first pulled into that driveway and seen the red car. My father laid it all out on the table like evidence in a case, because that's exactly what it was becoming. They used words and locks and lies, he said. We're going to use facts. Facts don't shout, Nora. They don't have to. I sat there at 3 a.m, exhausted and hollowed out and somehow, for the first time in years, completely clear. Derek and Priscilla thought they had won something that night. They thought they'd taken my home. They had no idea that they'd just handed a 35-year attorney and his very tired daughter every single thing we needed. The locks would change again before New Year's, just not by them. Christmas morning, my phone lit up with Derek's version of events. A text, sent at 9, breezy as a weather report. Hope you found somewhere. We can sort out the divorce and the house after the holidays. Try not to make this ugly for Rosie's sake. For Rosie's sake. The man who'd let his mother throw his daughter into the snow was lecturing me about Rosie's sake. I read it twice, and then I did something that felt almost unnatural after 4 years of managing his moods. I didn't answer. Not this time. My father looked over my shoulder at the screen and nodded slowly. Good, he said. Let him wonder. Silence, it turns out, is a language fluent people fear. By noon, I heard the other half of it. Priscilla had spent the morning working the cul-de-sac, telling anyone who'd listen that poor Derek's unstable wife had run off on Christmas and abandoned the family. She always did know how to get her story out first, but she'd made one mistake. She'd told it to Marcy. Marcy lived across the street, had watched me shovel her walk when her hip was bad, and Marcy did not buy a word of it. Around 1 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a message from her. I saw what they did last night, honey. I saw the bags. I saw you with the baby in the snow. Whatever you need from me, I'm your witness. I read it, and I had to put the phone down for a second. Priscilla had spent months teaching me that I was alone in that house, and it turned out the whole street had been watching, and at least one good woman had been keeping score. I texted Marcy back. Thank you. Then I got to work. The day after Christmas, my father cleared his kitchen table, put on his reading glasses, and became the man 3 counties knew to be afraid of across a negotiating table. "Here is how this works," he said, "and I want you to understand every step, because you're going to be the one standing there, not me." He explained it slowly. Because I was the sole owner and the house was my separate property, I had the legal right to reclaim it. What Priscilla had done, changing the locks and barring me, was an illegal self-help lockout, and no state lets you do that to a lawful owner. Brooke, living there without my consent, was trespassing. We would not break down any doors. We would do it in the full light of day, correctly, with a sheriff's deputy present on a civil standby to keep the peace, with a locksmith of my own, and with the deed in hand for anyone who wanted to see whose name was on it. "You will not raise your voice," my father said. "You won't need to. The paper will do the talking, and the paper is on your side." Then he filed the divorce petition, quiet and complete, citing the separate property and, in our state, the adultery that would weigh on any spousal support Derek dreamed of asking for. He didn't overreach. He never does. "We take what's yours," he said. "Nothing more. That's not weakness, Nora. That's the difference between us and them." I looked at the neat stack of documents, my whole future organized into tabs and staples, and I understood something I'd been too tired to see. My father had been preparing to protect me since before I even knew I'd need it. All I had to do now was show up and be brave. The locks would change again before New Year's, but this time, by me. While we prepared quietly, Derek was busy discovering the walls of the box he'd built for himself. I heard about it later, in pieces, some from Marcy and some from the bank teller who happened to go to my church. The morning after Christmas, Derek strolled into the bank to refinance the house, full of plans for Brooke and the new life he thought he was building. He wanted to pull cash out, fund the business, maybe buy Brooke that ring. And the loan officer, polite and patient, pulled up the property and told him what I had known since 1 in the morning. His name was on nothing. Not the deed. Not the trust. Not a single line of ownership on the house he'd been sleeping in for 4 years. He couldn't refinance a thing, because legally he had nothing to refinance. I'm told he raised his voice. I'm told they asked him to leave. And Priscilla, when he came home and told her, apparently went white, because Priscilla had been running her own math the whole time. She had gambled everything on that house. She had thrown me out to make room for a future she assumed was Derek's to give. And in one sentence from a stranger at a bank, she learned that the roof she'd chosen over her own grandchild belonged to the daughter-in-law she'd shoved into the snow. They still thought they had time. They still thought they could talk their way into it, or scare me into a cheap settlement. That was their last real mistake. They were treating me like the woman who used to keep the peace. They hadn't noticed she was gone. I want to tell you I felt nothing but triumph, but that would be a lie, and I promised myself I'd tell this straight. A few days in, Derek's aunt called me, the one decent branch on that whole family tree, and she told me something that has stayed with me. Priscilla had not always been the woman standing in my doorway. When she was young, newly married, she'd been thrown out of her own home by her own mother-in-law, one hard winter, with a baby on her hip, and nowhere to go. Derek's father had been away, and by the time he came back, the damage was done. She'd never had a house that was truly hers again. She'd spent 40 years afraid of being put out in the cold. And so when the chance came to hold the door instead of standing outside it, she grabbed it with both hands, even if it meant slamming it on another woman and another baby. I sat with that for a long time. I understood her. I did. I knew exactly the fear that had curdled inside her into cruelty. But understanding is not the same as forgiving, and it is nowhere near the same as allowing. She had known that cold personally, in her own arms, and she'd chosen to hand it to my daughter anyway, knowing better and doing worse. That's not a wound. That's a choice. I could hold both things at once, the way you learn to on a pediatric floor. Compassion for the frightened person, and a firm, unmoving line about what they would not be permitted to do to a child. So I felt for her, and I did not stop for 1 second. This is the part where I stopped being someone things happened to. My father could have run the whole thing for me. He offered gently, more than once. I can go serve them myself, sweetheart. You never have to see their faces again. And there was a version of me, the old one, who would have taken that. Let someone else carry the hardest thing, one last time. But I looked at Rosie stacking blocks on his living room floor, safe and warm and utterly unaware, and I knew that the woman she needed me to be could not hide behind her grandfather. So I chose. I signed the divorce petition myself and watched it filed. I sat down with my father and mapped out custody, and here he was careful with me, because he doesn't trade in false promises. The law won't hand you full custody just because he's a bad man, he said. But custody follows the best interest of the child, and you, Nora, have the stable home, the steady job, the medical record of that night, and a mother's spotless history. He has an affair, an eviction of his own child, and no roof he can legally claim. Judges notice these things. Then I made the choice that mattered most. I decided I would not sneak back into my house or beg for it in some quiet lawyer's office. I would reclaim it in the open, correctly, in front of the same street that had watched me carry trash bags through the snow. Not for revenge, for the record, and for Rosie, so that one day she'd know her mother didn't run. Her mother came back through the front door with her head up and the deed in her hand. I picked a date, the 29th, and I told my father to make the calls. We spent the next 2 days getting the terms exactly right, because a fair win holds up and a greedy one falls apart. My father was relentless about this. We take what is yours and not $1 more, he said, again and again, until it was in my bones. The house was mine, clean and simple, separate property he could not touch. The prenup capped what Derek could claim from the marriage, which wasn't much, since I'd been the one paying the mortgage while he chased his ideas. The adultery, documented and dated, meant no judge in our state was going to award him spousal support out of my paycheck. And Rosie stayed with me, with visitation to be set by the court, supervised at first, because a man who lets his mother throw his baby into the snow does not get handed unsupervised weekends on trust. That was the whole of it. I could have gone further. My father made sure I knew I could have pressed for damages, dragged Priscilla through a trespassing complaint, made the newspapers if I'd wanted. I thought about it. Then I thought about the kind of woman I wanted my daughter to grow up watching. No, I told him. Just the house, the divorce, and my daughter. Let them keep whatever they can carry out the door. I don't want their things. I want my life back. My father looked at me for a long moment, and something like pride crossed his tired face. That's the difference between justice and revenge, Nora, he said. Justice knows when to stop. We had our terms. We had our date. We had a sheriff's deputy scheduled and a locksmith booked, and a deed with one name on it. All that was left was to walk up my own front steps and take back what had always been mine. Word travels on a cul-de-sac. By the 28th, Derek and Priscilla knew something was coming, though they had no idea what. Marcy told me they'd been jumpy, the red car coming and going, Priscilla peering through the curtains. But they still didn't run, and they still didn't call a lawyer, because in their minds they were the ones holding the house, and I was the one out in the cold. Derek even invited Brooke to stay through New Year's, telling her the crazy ex would blow off steam and slink away like always. He was so sure of the old story. He didn't know the woman in that story had rewritten the ending. That night, my last night at my father's before the 29th, I sat in the dark by the guest crib and watched Rosie sleep. I thought about how easy it would have been to disappear. Find a rental. Start over quietly. Let them keep the house and swallow the loss, the way I'd swallowed everything else. And I understood, finally, why I couldn't. It wasn't about the walls or the deed. It was about the moment my daughter would one day be old enough to ask what happened. I wanted the true answer to be that her mother stood up, that she came back through the front door, that she was calm, and she was right, and she did not scream. I could have screamed that Christmas. Instead, I let the paperwork do the talking. If you've ever been underestimated because you stayed quiet and steady, then you already understand me, and you're my kind of people. Subscribe, drop a comment, and stay with me, because tomorrow they were finally going to read the name on the deed. The morning of the 29th was clear and bitterly cold, the sky that hard, scrubbed blue you only get after heavy snow. I dressed carefully, not for battle, but for calm. Good coat, hair back. The folder from the fireproof box tucked under my arm like a Bible. My father drove his own car and I drove mine, with Rosie bundled and warm in her seat behind me, because I wanted her there. Not to see anything ugly. We'd timed it so she'd be napping in Marcy's front room across the street before the door ever opened. But I wanted her in the neighborhood. I wanted her small and safe, within sight of the house I was about to win back for her. The drive across town was quiet. I passed the same glittering windows I'd passed 4 nights before, when I'd been coatless and shaking and sure my life was over. Everything looked different now. Not because anything outside had changed, but because I had. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and I breathed, in for 4, out for 4, the way I teach frightened parents to breathe before a procedure. I was not angry. That surprised me most of all. Somewhere in those 4 days the anger had cooled and hardened into something more useful, something quiet and immovable, certainty. I turned onto the cul-de-sac and there it was. My little blue house at the end of the road, snow on the roof, the Christmas wreath still hanging crooked on the front door. My wreath. And I noticed, with a strange, aching tenderness, that the red ribbon I'd tied on it back in November was still there, fluttering a little in the cold. They'd changed the locks. They'd changed everything they could reach, but they'd never once thought to take down my ribbon. We parked in a small procession that a quiet street notices immediately. My father's sedan. My car. The sheriff's deputy in his marked SUV, a broad, unhurried man named Halloran who'd done 100 of these and had the calm of a man who'd never lost one. And the locksmith's van, my locksmith this time. Coffee in hand and no idea he was about to become part of a story. Doors opened up and down the cul-de-sac. Marcy came out onto her porch and lifted a hand to me, and I carried Rosie over and passed her into Marcy's warm arms without a word, and Marcy took her inside where it was safe. Then I turned and walked up my own front steps for the first time in 4 days, my father beside me, the deputy a pace behind. I didn't pound this time. I knocked. Once. Firm and even. Footsteps. The door opened on the new chain they'd installed, and Priscilla's face appeared in the gap, already arranging itself into a sneer. She thought I'd come to beg. You could see it. She thought the crazy ex had finally come crawling back for scraps, and she was ready to enjoy it. You have some nerve, she started, showing up here on a... And then her eyes moved past me, to my father in his good coat, to the deputy's uniform, to the badge catching the morning light. And the sneer on her face began, very slowly, to come apart. What is this? She said. It wasn't a question anymore. It was the first sound of a woman realizing the ground has moved. Behind her, in the warm house that was mine, I heard Derek's voice call out, careless and annoyed. Who is it? Nobody answered him. I just looked at Priscilla through the gap in the door, calm as still water, and I said, Open the door, Priscilla. It's time we settled whose house this is. She didn't open it. She stood frozen behind the chain, so my father stepped forward, and he did the thing he'd been doing across tables for 35 years. He made the truth sound like weather, unavoidable and calm. Ma'am, he said, my name is Raymond Frost. I'm an attorney, and I'm my daughter's attorney. This home is titled solely to Honora Frost, held in her trust, purchased before her marriage with her own inheritance. It is her separate property. He held the deed up to the gap in the door, unhurried, so she could see the single name printed on it. Your son's name does not appear on this deed, this trust, or any instrument of ownership. It never has. Derek arrived at the door then, shouldering up behind his mother, still in the confident half-smirk of a man who thinks every problem is a misunderstanding he can charm his way out of. Okay, this is ridiculous, he said. It's my house too. We're married. Whatever she told you? My father did not raise his voice. He never once raised his voice. He simply turned the deed a few degrees so the light hit Derek's face and Derek could read his own absence. "You are not on it, Derek," he said. "You were never on it. She wouldn't sign it over. And now you know why." And I watched it land. I watched 4 years of assumption drain out of my husband's face in real time, replaced by the pale, dawning understanding that the house he'd thrown his family out of had never, for one single day, belonged to him. Deputy Halloran cleared his throat, gentle and enormous. "The young woman inside," he said, "the one who isn't on the lease or the title. She'll need to gather her things and step out. She's not a lawful occupant here." I said it quietly, into all of it. "Your name was never on this house, Derek." That was when they came apart, and I stayed whole. And that is the whole story right there in one sentence. Derek yanked the door open off its chain, his charm gone, his face blotchy and furious. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, loud enough that 2 more neighbors stepped out onto their porches. "I'm your husband. This is my home. I live here. You can't just show up with a cop and throw me out of my own." "You stop being my husband," I said, quiet, on Christmas Eve. Priscilla's voice climbed over his, shrill and cracking. "After everything this family did for you. You ungrateful scheming. You planned this. You had a lawyer the whole time." She was screaming now, the church cardigan trembling on her shoulders, spit flying in the cold air, and I understood that I was watching a woman lose the only thing she had gambled her soul to keep. I didn't shout back. I didn't need to. I let her run out of air, and then I said the thing I'd been carrying up the steps like a stone in my coat pocket. I said it just above a whisper, so she had to go quiet